Hey, it's Marthea Pitts, the MSW coach, and thank you for coming back for another episode of Macro Social Work Your Way. Be sure to connect with me on social media. I'm on Instagram at _MSW coach, Facebook at the MSW coach, and on LinkedIn as Marthea Pitts, the MSW coach. This is going to be a great episode. Hey, it's Marthea, the MSW coach. I hope your day is going well. Thank you for coming back for another episode. So let's get into it. Last week, I talked about my journey, my career journey into social work. And I said that I would do a second podcast episode around my career journey into macro social work because they are two very distinct different points in my career life. So I first want to say the feedback that I've been getting back from that episode. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. You sent me a message, a tweet, however you have contacted me to let me know that you enjoyed that episode. I really appreciate that. So let's get into it, right? So my journey into macro social work was it started in my first case management job. I've always been a full-time employee while going through school. And so um, prior to me starting my MSW degree program, I got a job as a case manager, which is the title that I went by. But my formal HR job title was Workforce Development Career Counselor. And so I just want to give it a little context about how major me getting this job was, right? So if you listen to my first episode about my journey into social work, um, you'll remember me giving you a very thorough overview of what the workforce looks like in the rural city that I live in. If you have not listened to that podcast episode, I encourage you to stop listening to this episode. Listen to that episode first, part one, and then come back to this episode, right? Because it gives you all of the background that you need to understand the situation that I was facing. So when I landed this job at this time, I had my bachelor's degree in business administration. And I took a year. Let me back up. So I graduated with my bachelor's. Again, at that time, I was working in a call center, like I explained before. But I stopped working that job the last semester of my bachelor degree program because at this point I have been working nonstop in these very exhaustive jobs. And to say that I don't believe I talked about this last episode, but now I'm remembering it, right? To say that I was burnt out is a gross understatement. In those positions, specifically the last call center that I worked in, I would cry in my car every morning on my commute to work. I would cry every evening on my commute back home. I'm very transparent in the fact that that job, that job at the time ruined my life. And I say that because I was an emotional wreck during that time because I had some personal things, a major personal event going on. My job in and of itself was super, super stressful because I worked in a call center that dealt with child support for the state of Florida where I live. And again, another little piece of information that will help you understand. This was a job that I wanted for so many years because it paid so much more than the other jobs that I was in, right? Like if to get a job at this agency in that call center or at that agency as a whole back in the day was for people who were in the call center like arena of work, it was a major, major come up, right? And so for years I had tried to get a job there and I never could move past the skills test assessment that they gave, right? Where they bring you in, they pull your application, they bring you in to do a test, all of the things, right? A large part of that was back then these jobs were highly like competitive. Like there never was a lot of them because people stayed in those positions for a long time. And again, you have to remember I live in a city where at the time, um, there still was a lot of nepotism that came along with state jobs. A lot, a lot of it. You had to know somebody that knew somebody that knew somebody to get you in the door. And again, I knew no one. So it was always goals to work at this specific organization in these roles because the pay was just out of the world. Um, and the and so this leads to two lessons that I learned at this point in my life, in my career life was this is my way of thinking based off of my own experience. If you have a different experience, that is wonderful for you, right? But this may help someone because it usually does when I tell this story. What I learned out of that lesson because I applied for that job multiple, multiple, multiple times. And once I was there, and it was like after the first year or so, I think I was in that at that job for 2 years, maybe a little bit more. I don't really remember, but I looking at my resume. What I quickly learned was that I was being protected, right? That's why I didn't get the job the first time, the second time, the third time I applied for it. And instead of me listening to the messages that were being, like me just connecting the dots, like, okay, Marthea, maybe this is not the opportunity for you. I kind of forced my way into it. And because it was not in alignment in the way that I move in the world, right? You can believe in whatever you believe, but I believe in something more than me. Um, I'm faith led. Let me be clear about that, right? I don't want to be elusive to that fact, but I realized that that position was not where I was supposed to be. And because I instead of me like being remaining in alignment and me forcing my way into it, I had to learn that lesson. And so that job ruined me emotionally. It ruined me physically. It ruined my relationship that I was in at the time and had been in for a long time. It ruined it. It ruined my home life. It ruined the way that I engage with people because I was just so miserable in that job. Um, so I quit that job the last semester of my bachelor degree program, and then I took a year off from work. And like I shared in the last episode, it was in that year off that I think they call that a career sabbatical. Yeah, I believe so. It was in that time that I took off from work that I had like I got a good understanding about where I wanted to be in life. Okay, so fast forward. Oh, and I just want to say that year off from work was the best year of my life ever. I was traveling everywhere. I was doing all of the things. I was going out of town like every 2 weeks. It was great. Right. So I always tell that part to people because I was living better that year off from work than I had ever lived in the like 5 plus years, 6 to 7 years before that, where I was working full time nonstop, 2 and 3 jobs. Yeah. So, again, that may help someone to know. Like, and I always say, I look back at it now and I'm just like, where did the money come from? I don't know, but it did. But I needed that time to recover from the burnout that I experienced from that job. And let me be clear why I say I was burnt out, and that was not a social work related job. I was burnt out in that job because it was very I was taking on average like 120 calls a day. Talking to a multitude of different people, stakeholders. Um what really was draining on me was me having to listen to people's woes and like trials and tribulations in life that were associated with them not getting their child support payments or having child support payments deducted out of their pay. Having to listen to that while I was struggling in my own life was just all too much. And then on top of that, taking 120 calls a day, being told when you can take breaks and lunches and not even having a full lunch, a lunch of 30 minutes, where we worked in this huge office complex where they timed it one time when we first moved into that complex, and they said like literally it will take someone 30 minutes to walk from the back of the parking complex to the building where our office was. So if it takes you 30 minutes to walk from the parking lot to the office and I only have a 30-minute lunch, what do you think happened? Often I didn't take a lunch because, fun fact, in call centers, your time is managed heavily. This is why I said in my last episode that I went back to school because I got tired of people telling me what to do. Because in call centers, your every move is monitored. Can't take a break when you want to take a break. You can't take lunch when you want to take a lunch. You have to be told based on the systems that are in place that project like when call volumes are low and does scheduling. It's all a lot, right? And so at this point, I'm six something years into this, it was just too much. And it began to take a toll on me emotionally. And so I'm gonna be even more transparent. I was not prepared to talk about this. I just went into work one day and quit. I didn't give any notice. I had been planning in my mind because I'm just a natural born planner to leave the job at some point, but I didn't know when it would be. And actually what broke the straw that what do they say? The straw that broke the camel's back was I went in that day and my supervisor was supervising. That's all Imma just say, like, she does what she does, right? And it never ever was directed to me, it was always directed to my colleagues, and that's one thing about Marthea, like, if I leave an organization, it's never because of anything that was done wrong to me, it was because of the ill treatment of my colleagues, right? I'm very big on that, that's one of my principles, my ethics, like, I don't like to be a part of things where people are being mistreated, especially when you're dealing with their livelihood. That's just how committed I am to economic equity when it comes to work and people going back to school so they can like build up their marketability for jobs. I'm very big on that. So she was doing her thing that day and I just sent an email and I hit send on the email and I had my purse on my bag on my shoulder and that it was over. Actually, before that, now that I remember, I called my mother. I took a break, an emergency break, because again, you can't take unplanned breaks. Who does that? Why? Um, so I took a break. I called my mom and I was like, Mom, I'm gonna quit. This is my plan. And I already had my plan. My mind was already made up. But with anything in life, sometimes you just need to run it past the people that you love most, right? You or someone who is your cheerleader. So I called my mama at work and I was like, Mom, I'm getting ready to quit. I said, this is my plan. I have this saved up. School is almost over. I'm gonna get another job. I'm not worried about that. I'll have my degree, blah, 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 blah. My mama was like, You already called to see how long, like, you already know what you need to do to move your money around. Yep, I already called. I already. She was like, do what you need to do. I hung up with my mama. I walked back in. I typed my letter. I hit send and I walked out. That was the first time and the last time that I've ever quit a job, right? Other than the KFC job. If you don't know what that is, go listen to podcast to the first part, right? So I quit and that was the best year of my life. It was the best year of my life. So fast forward, I am now in my case management job, and I was super excited about that job, getting that job, because before me having, and this is post my graduation with my bachelor's degree, before I had my bachelor's degree, getting a job as a case manager was goals for me because I knew people in my personal life that did case management work, primarily my friend that really pushed me to go get a social work degree. She was always in case management jobs and she was making money, right? Money to me was anything that was over and beyond 30,000 a year because I was there, right? I don't think I ever made anything over 30,000 in the call center settings. So I got the call, I interviewed, I got the job, I started the job. Now I'm working as a workforce development career counselor. I feel like I have hit the lottery. This is a come up. I'm making money. I'm making 37,100 a year. And I'll talk about that in just a moment. That amount, I'm telling you that for a reason. So I'm like, okay, I'm doing it. I'm doing it. I'm working my job. I'm a workforce development career counselor. I'm excelling because again, a lot of the strategies that I'm using with my career coaching, with my career seekers, was birthed out of my own career journey in the same city that I'm delivering this service. So I know how to navigate the systems. Nobody know how to get a job better than Marthea. That's just fact. That's factual information, right? So I'm using a lot of the strategies that I developed years before to navigate in my career because I understand the complex system that's in the city where I live, where it's all based off of who you know. And that's inside and outside of state government because we live in a small rural town, right? People may think it's a big city, but it's a small rural town. So I'm teaching my career seekers like how to navigate, how to, juggle the requirements of life and still get the job that you need to be able to take care of yourself and your family if you have one. I'm hugely successful in the first 60 days on the job after I get out of training. So much so that I helped two of my career seekers because at this time I was working with the universal career seeker. So this could be anyone who had degrees and years of professional level experience to people who maybe had technical training and or more like in the service based industry, right? So my first 60 days on the job, I I realized that I'm very good at job searching and job matching. How this became evident to me and my colleagues was that I had a gentleman come in because worked with Universal people who were receiving unemployment at the time. So these were people that were getting unemployment benefits and they had been getting them for a few months and they were brought in early before they reached the point of exhausting their benefits because of like there's a whole calculation that unemployment does around to determine like if this person can get reemployed sooner rather than later. That's the best layman way I can explain it. So anyway, this gentleman came in and he begins to tell me what he's done in the past. I look at his resume, I give him tips on his resume, and I begin to ask questions about where have you been applying, blah 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 blah, what type of work are you looking for, all of the questions that need to be asked. And he like tells me that he hasn't been successful in getting any jobs, really finding any leads. And I instantly remember a job that I had just saw the day before or either earlier that day because every morning I would job search. I would look at what job leads were out there, what opportunities existed, just so I could stay in the know about what the labor market looks like in my city. And again, this is a practice that or a habit that I developed out of my own job searching. Like this is something, and I still do this to this day. I job search every morning, like how people may read. I don't even know. Do people still read the newspaper? How people read the newspaper, or you may read your newspaper online. I get up in the mornings after I do my morning thing and I job search. I look at what jobs are out in the labor market. So, anyway, I say, oh, I see that you did this at this organization. I just saw a job that is similar to that where you like have a lot of the transferable skills needed. You would be a good candidate for this job, right? So I searched, found the job, and I matched him to the job. This is in the same system that he had already been looking at. And I think that job had been posted for like a week, but he didn't connect the dots on the fact that that would be a good job for him to apply. So I gave him the referral. He landed the job. That was a six-figure plus job. He ended up being there for years and like very thankful to me that he got the job. The second person, she came in, she was a degree professional. She had been looking for jobs for months and was unsuccessful. The same scenario was me job searching. I found a job that matched her level of experience based on her transferable skills. I helped her tighten up her resume so she could compete for the job, and she landed it. That was a $70,000 plus job that she landed. And all of this is in the first 60 months. 60 days of me being in this position, right? I didn't realize the magnitude of my skill set until the CEO of the workforce center that I worked in talked about me apparently at the big monthly leadership meeting when my supervisor came back and said the CEO gave you a shout out because apparently you work with someone that knows them and you help them land a job and then all of these other things, right? And that I provided great customer service. Then on top of that, I was getting awards or acknowledged for the fact that I had these major job placements because job placements and workforce development equals outcomes, right? So I had two major job placements. And then are, the more the salary for the job that the people are landing, the bigger the outcome it is for a workforce development board or center. So not only was I getting placements, I was getting high salary placements. I was also people were like singing my praises. Like I'm really good at this. So that was when I realized like, ooh, I'm tapping into something. So then I moved. I got promoted because in that position, I didn't mention this, I was just part-time. I was just part-time because and I applied for a part-time job because I wanted to ease my way back into the workforce after being out of work for a year. So I got promoted. I got a full-time job. I started working within the welfare transition program, which for anybody that works in like a children and families, um, TANF type program, there's a workforce development side of that program where recipients of TANF benefits based on the law that governs that program are mandated to do work activity. So I worked on the other side of that program where the recipients would have to come into our program and be assigned work activity. So in that, I have a good friend of mine. She is her master's is in public administration. So she's always very intrigued with like the data, the numbers. So one day she came into my cubicle and was like, Marthea, look at these numbers that I pulled from another region. Again, she's a case manager just like me. She's like, but she's really good at what she does. She's like, Marthea, look at these numbers. Look at how, their participation rates are much higher than ours and blah, 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 blah. And then she went into like tell me about how the work activity that people are assigned in that region that she was looking at is much different than here. And so out of that, we both began. She asked the questions, but she was looking at it more of how can we improve performance in our region, right? The questions I began to ask was, why is it so different? Why are the work activities so much more the requirements in our region? Why is it so heavier than the other region, right? And I began to ask questions about like what do the people look like there? What are their demographics, right? Because there was such a glaring difference between the work activities in one region and the other, right? And I was always under the assumption that the work activities should be the same in every region, regardless of what, because it's all flowing down from a federal law. But what I quickly learned was that it wasn't. And this is where I became super intrigued with policy interpretation, specifically around program implementation. And I began to ask a lot of questions about why is it so different, right? I began to study other programs around the country to look at like what they were doing. I began to read articles in literature and attending webinars and workshops to understand the differences. And that was like my spark to macro work. Out of that, again, I'm still trying to, now I'm working with a whole different population of career seekers, and they have even more barriers that they're facing to employment that could really help them achieve lifelong self sufficiency, which is the overall objective of the program. But based on the jobs that were available in our city, there's a ton of recidivism in the program, meaning people will get a job and they'll be right back. Like in the fall, they'll be back in the spring for another job or back on the benefits because full-time employment here is few and far between, especially for people without degrees, right? Or people who have a lot of basic needs barriers. They don't have adequate childcare, they don't have adequate transportation, they don't have the things that they need to be successful in the workforce. So I began to shift from like the program interpretation type focus because what my friend helped me realize is that it's different like that because you can't regulate how one reads the law and interprets it in their mind and like puts it into a program design, right? This is before I knew about implicit bias. Right? We were talking about this in very layman's terms, but now I understand that a lot of that is due to implicit bias. But anyway, that's a whole nother conversation for an entirely different day. So what I began to do was what we do as social workers. We always find ways to work around when we don't have a system that is adequate enough to really help our clients. So I began to read a lot of articles again, attend a lot of workshops, take trainings on ways to better engage my clients, my career seekers rather. And I was very interested in pregnant and parenting youth. Extremely interested in pregnant and parenting youth because I had a handful on my caseload at the time. I became so passionate about helping pregnant and parenting youth get the jobs they need because that was like my way of doing intervention work, even though they were already in the system. But I felt like if I could help a young mom, and not just a young mom, it could have been a dad, it's a pregnant and parenting youth, if I could help a young mom or a young dad get what they need in the beginning to get into a job that can really help them achieve lifelong self sufficiency, it will prevent them from being the the other participants that I had on my caseload who have been in and out, in and out, in and out of the program for 10 years or however long they've been on there, because by the law, you can only get it for so long, but for so many months. But yeah, so I became very intrigued in that. So what that looked like at the time was I began to have very what's the word, transparent conversations with my supervisor and my friends, my colleagues, about like the fact that I'm super passionate about pregnant and parenting youth. That's why it's so important to market what you're good at, because I was getting a lot of successful outcomes with the pregnant and parenting youth and young adults that I worked with on my caseload. They were going back to school, they were getting training that they need. They were getting jobs so they could be paid while they went back to school, and they were doing it all in a way that worked with their schedule. So, because I was very vocal to people, I marketed like this is my thing and I'm good at it. It became like widely known in my region that Marthea is good with working with pregnant parenting youth and young adults. That's what she likes to do. Right. So I then was given um my supervisor, who's always been very supportive of my career and still is to this day because we're good friends, she began to assign me pregnant and parenting youth and young adult cases, because these cases were hard to work because of the lack of policy that existed to really support them in the program. Right. So I began to serve this caseload, which was primarily comprised of pregnant and parenting youth. I was getting outcomes out of this world. I was excelling. Um, and so from there, opportunities were created for me internally in my organization to be the first in a position where it was a hybrid program between the Welfare Transition Program and the WIOA, the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act youth program, for me to serve both, to serve my career seekers in this dual program. So again, it's very important to market what you're good at, because career opportunities will be made available to you that you didn't even imagine, right? I never would have guessed that I could end up with a whole caseload of pregnant parenting youth and young adults, and that a whole new position would be created for me. So I was promoted into that position. I'm now serving only pregnant and parenting youth and young adult. I'm in paradise, right? This is the population I want. This is how I want to help them. I want to make certain that they have access to careers and education training that they need to achieve true lifelong self-sufficiency. So I'm doing my thing. I did that for a little while. And then from there, I started to understand that my role was way bigger, right? I still didn't know what this all meant. So fast forward, I graduate. I leave that organization because there was a lot of internal like restructuring, and just things were moving in a different direction. And I went to a nonprofit. It was my first time ever working in a nonprofit, and I was essentially working as a program coordinator. So I flipped my experience and I got a job as a program coordinator, but it's still heavy direct service. Heavy, heavy direct service. So, but at this time, I'm finishing up my MSW degree. And so my move was already to get a macro role. I didn't understand what macro was at the time. I didn't call it that. I didn't start calling it macro until I got on the internet about 2 to 3 years ago, because you all call it macro. I viewed it just as an opportunity to create larger change for my population. So, yeah, I worked at the program coordinator role, but at the time I was still strategizing for me to find a macro position where I could create large scale opportunities for pregnant and parenting youth to either get careers or get into education opportunities. Um, and I began job searching for myself. Like I knew what type of organization I wanted to work in, what population I wanted to work in, what I wanted my focus of work to be. And I did my job searching thing. I became my own career coaching client, which I always talk about because once I graduated with my MSW degree, I just thought the jobs would fall in my lap. So what I was doing was I was applying for these jobs and wasn't getting a hit back until I was like, Marthea, you know what to do to get a job. Just do what you do, right? So I did all of my things, all of my strategies, all of my techniques that I teach inside. I teach social workers my exact strategies, my exact framework, my exact process that I took to land my first macro job. I teach that inside of my career accelerator, micro to macro. So if you're interested, attend my live workshop so you can learn more about how you can join the accelerator. So anyway, I became my own career coaching client. I began to do all of the things. And within 3 months, less than that, I found, applied, and interviewed for my first macro job where I served as the director of the Teen Mom Learning Pathway, where I was responsible for designing, implementing a career education program for pregnant and parenting youth around the world. So this was major for me because this program was in an on it's still in existence in an online high school, and the youth and young adults that are in the program get an opportunity to earn their high school diploma, not just a GED, which there's nothing wrong with the GED. But one thing that I learned firsthand from working with my career seekers on the front lines is that they wanted high school diplomas. They were very vocal about the fact, like, I don't want a GED, I want my high school diploma, but the systems and structures in my city are not sufficient enough to support them in going back to school to get a high school diploma as full-time working parents. It just didn't. There was no such program at the time that existed, and if it did, it cost too much money for them to attend, and or the program that I worked in when I worked with them, because of the policy, did not support them in going to get a high school diploma, right? You either had to get a GED or go get a trade, right? So I landed this job and now I was creating the change that I wanted. And I was again creating a workaround to the policies that I saw that were inequitable. So that's my journey into macro social work. Like it was very fast paced. I realized quickly that, this is what I want to do. This is why I'm intrigued with it. Also, again, like I said, I didn't refer to it as macro social work. I just knew that I wanted to be excuse me, I always confuse it. I wanted to be prevention focused, right? I didn't want people to be in the cycle of coming in and out of the same welfare transition program. I really wanted to help them get what they need so they can be self-sufficient for a lifetime. So I'm gonna leave it there. And maybe because this took a lot out of me to tell my story, right? So maybe what I'll do is the beginning of next year, I'll share like a few different episodes about the different roles, positions, macro jobs that I've had since then. But yeah, leave me a comment. Follow me on Instagram at the underscore MSW coach or the MSW coach on Facebook. And let me know what you think about my journey into social work and macro social work. But I have to go. I can't talk long because I'm going to take a Peloton class. So have a wonderful week. I know it's the first week back after the break last week for the holiday. But have a good week. Happy macro career planning. Bye.